Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our session on trauma-informed pedagogy. I'm Caroline Toscano. I'm with my colleague, Dr. Dung Mao, and we're going to talk about an article that we had published, but also some specific strategies for designing a trauma-informed classroom. We have some handouts on the side there. And if we don't have enough, we do have them uploaded on the platform for QM. So we have the slides, we have the handout here. We also have another extensive handout with plenty of examples and references and so forth that you can look at and you can review after the presentation. So in terms of our learning objectives, we want to talk about what trauma-informed pedagogy really means. We want to identify some specific strategies that can be employed into courses. Another thing that we want to talk about is discipline-specific trauma-informed courses, because as you know, most courses, they're very different in their design and their delivery. And so it only makes sense that a trauma-informed approach would also be specific to each kind of discipline and each kind of course. So here I'm gonna give you a little bit more of a background of who I am and also my colleagues. So I'm Caroline Toscano, and I am an instructional designer at a community college here in the Twin Cities called Century College. But I've also been, I've worked in higher ed for over 35 years in a number of institutions and a number of different capacities. And I'm also a former, I call it a Mighty Research Fellow, which stands for Minnesota Minnesota Institutional Trauma-Informed Institute on Trauma-Informed Education at St. Thomas University in St. Paul. And I'm going to give the mic over now to my colleague.
We have one mic, so we cannot play, pass the. Hello, good morning. My name is Dung Mao. I am an extension educator at the University of Minnesota here. I'm in the Department of Family Health and Wellbeing. I'm looking over there because we changed our department's name, so it's going to take a while for me to register. It is wonderful to see you. It's wonderful to be here and share our research with you. I also am an instructional designer for a while before I joined the university, and I do have an opportunity to teach at Minneapolis College, which is another community college here in Minnesota. And so many stories to share as we go along here. And I know that, we'll both learn from each other, and we love to learn from you.
Thank you, Dung. And before we go on, I just want to get a show of hands about, who everybody is here. If you are an instructional designer, would you raise your hand? Okay, we got a lot of instructional designers. If you're faculty, raise your hand. Okay. If you're an administrator, okay, good. IT people, okay, got it. Anybody I haven't I've missed? That's kind of the general audience at QM, but just want to talk about the question of what is trauma-informed pedagogy, okay? So basically, a trauma-informed pedagogy, it's a kind of methodology that really acknowledges the traumatic impact of students' past and present experiences. And also the goal is basically to understand the unique experiences and also to validate the variety of experiences that can adversely affect a student's ability to learn. And I'm going to give this over to Young now.
So I get the opportunity to learn from you, right? This is fun. So one of the things that we would love to hear from you is why you're here in this session in particular. What interests you about trauma-informed pedagogy?
Yeah, we're not using like Mentimeter or Perusal or anything like that. It's kind of just a pre-COVID type of, raise your hand. So, yeah. Yes.
So my team has, I'm Vicarious from Hillsborough Community College. My team has on it some online learning retention coordinators who reach out to students if they have trouble and ask for help, or if their faculty member says this person is struggling for reasons that seem to be outside of the content. And one of my folks put together some information about trauma-informed pedagogy as well, because he finds that a lot of students are having difficulty, even still from COVID. Sometimes they're just, traumatized by experience they've had, or Sorry, I'm not starting over, but I do have people on my team at Hillsborough Community College who work with students a lot, and they have talked about this topic. And I'm just interested in hearing more things that you have to say about this. We do have a lot of students who have been through a lot. They've lost family to COVID. They've had their own issues and illnesses, and just other things that have happened to them. Actually, there was on Halloween night, there was a shooting around the corner from my campus. So, there are a lot of things that our students are going through, and we want to be able to help them as much as possible. So hoping to get some tips here.
After about maybe 20, 25 years of teaching biology and genetics, I went for a master's in mental health counseling. And I realized that we're not having these conversations in my university in the classrooms. We're not having these conversations about how trauma affects our students. And I think that's why I'm here, because I think we do need to have those conversations. We have college campuses that have counselors on campus. And in our campus, those are the only people that are talking about trauma with the students. And because of confidentiality, we, the professors, we don't know what's going on. So I'm interested in this, not just to learn, but to expand the conversation.
Thank you very much. My name is Raul Moreno. I'm with eCampus, Oregon State University. And I come at this, I guess, from a few levels. I'm a former community college instructor, so I saw a lot of trauma among my students there. This past week, I was working with a faculty member who shared that she's going to have to pause on her course development because she lost family members in a mass shooting. So I'm thinking about trauma-informed pedagogy at that level too, working with faculty. And then I took the OLC. It's a week-long course. I recommend it on this same topic, and was kind of enumerating the ways that our eCampus essentials, as we call them, it's basically aligned with the QM rubric, the way that we can see trauma-informed pedagogy in those essentials. And the facilitator came back and said, no, you have to be more intentional about trauma-informed pedagogy. It's not just kind of checking the boxes. So those are a few reasons.
Hi, my name is James McCarroff. I'm an instructional designer at St. Paul College, a community college, also in the Twin Cities. And we are an anti-racist, trauma-informed campus, which I think is great. And I feel like on the academic affairs side and instructional support, we've made great strides in anti-racist pedagogy. But I think I've seen more of the trauma-informed stuff happening in student affairs, which is great. But now I want to, bring more and more into that, into the classroom.
My name is Alan Wages. I teach family studies and related courses at Faulkner University. And so many of my topics are very personal to students. And I want to know what is the best practice to communicate to them, or how do I perhaps even redesign the content that I'm sharing, or the assessments that I'm having students go through that can be more trauma informed.
I'm Andrea Schwegler, faculty member at Texas A&M University, Central Texas. We are located outside of Fort Cavazos. This is a shout out for our military affiliated students and faculty and staff. We need to remember that they have had a lot of traumatic experiences and they are in our classroom. So shout out to them.
Any other thoughts? Thank you so much for sharing. And, you know, we are on the same page here that this is indeed needed and it does indeed impact students, right?
Okay, thanks everyone for your input. That's really helpful for us to be able to share with each other what we're learning here. Many of you probably, you might be familiar with the Horizon report through EDUCAUSE. And every year they have a report, a Horizon report. Well, in this year's Horizon report, they mentioned, you know, the growing concern for mental health on campus and in online teaching, you know, psychological effects, economic effects, of course, you know, the implications of student debt and also just the ability to pay for courses and also living expenses is, you know, as the amount of cost to attend university and college goes up and up and up. Environmental concerns, one of which, of course, is COVID. You know, and also issues like food insecurity, migration patterns and so forth, and you know, ability to have housing and everything. And of course, political implications as, you know, things are becoming more politically polarized. That has implications for, you know, access to higher education and accommodation as well. At this point, I want to, I'm going to have Jung talk a little bit about putting a face to this with some of his students that he works with and some of the stories that they've told that kind of illustrate this ongoing concern with trauma-informed practice.
Thank you. And you know, I've heard many of our learners here shared their stories about their students. So this is definitely not an intellectual exercise, right? We don't just go, oh, this is interesting, but you know, bring it home, right? So this is just, I'm going to share two stories. So this is the first one. There's one more, but this two stories is just one of maybe 7 or 8 that I received a week from students. So, you know, when the semester starts, students start doing good, everybody's doing good, and then boom, life hits, right? And we have a student says, you know, my significant other passed away, and it takes a toll in my life, and my grandfather passed away, or is in the hospital with kidney failure. And there's so much going on and so much weighing on me, and I can't focus, right? This is now, school is not where my mind is. I don't want to fail the class. Could you help me, right? And another one is says, you know, I'm writing to let you know that I've been without a computer for 2 weeks, so my class is online. So without a computer for 2 weeks, I'm sitting in a library, right, writing this email. I just got out of surgery. Right. And I will try my best to complete the assignments. I'm currently homeless. So we have, you know, surgery. We have no computer now. We're homeless. Don't have the fund to get it. I can try to attend a Zoom meeting with my phone. And, you know, there's trouble with that. It's like just data. So compound of things that our students are going through. And then as faculty, we're like, holy cow, what can I do to support you go through this? Because there's a reason why you're in school, right? Despite what everybody else says, or many, you know, popular media says, education is still a very potent tool for academic, for financial well-being, right? You get the degree, you get the skill, you make more money, and this is what they're going through, right? So, and this is why this is important work, and I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. So just to give a few statistics about this, 66 to 85% of youth in a study mentioned here reported at least one lifetime traumatic event exposure. And in another study, as many as 50% of college students are exposed to a potentially traumatizing event in their first year of college. And trauma, as you might already know about the famous Ferlitti et al. Study with the Centers for Disease Control and Kaiser Permanente about the childhood adverse experiences research. Trauma definitely increases the susceptibility to depression and other comorbidities. So before we begin in depth, I want to talk about some assumptions that we're going into with this presentation. And that is, we talk a lot about the whole person when we trying to help students. We think, what is the whole person? It's more than just the person themselves. We have to consider the context in which the person is living. And that includes our environment, our histories, our generation, all of those kinds of things that fit into this assumption. Also, there's some thinking, I believe, that trauma is something that is the purview of people who are licensed psychologists or therapists. I believe that everyone has a right to speak about trauma-informed practice because trauma affects everyone. It's ubiquitous. Our lived experiences attest to our need to talk about it. Another thing I didn't mention is before, one of the reasons that I've been really interested in trauma-informed practice was many years ago, when I taught at the University of Minnesota, I was in a program where I taught English to war refugees. And boy, did that open my eyes about trauma. And that really galvanized me into becoming more involved in the aspect of trauma-informed teaching and learning. Again, also, there are different ways people perceive trauma, but as we learn more and more about it, the newer conception is that trauma is viewed more as an injury that happens to someone rather than a disorder in an individual. And that means that, the way to recover is not just, individually based, but also socially based. Couple of other assumptions we have is that trauma-informed is highly interdisciplinary. It builds from many different disciplines, specifically research from medicine, from history, from political science, from criminal justice, all kinds of, from the law. And so as a result, it's going to depend on a lot of cross collaboration among disciplines in order to evolve. And it is relatively new and it is ever evolving as a result. And then there's talk about self-care in terms of healing from trauma, but there's also the need for community care, and that it's not just a singular issue. In order to heal from a trauma, we need to really involve the community, the society. It's that important. At the same time, in education, I think trauma-informed pedagogy kind of dovetails nicely into the evolution of paradigms in education. Traditionally, when students weren't learning, there was the thought that there's a deficit in their learning. They're not learning because there's something about them that makes it so they're not able to learn. Then there's kind of a movement for grit and resilience. Okay, so if a student doesn't have what it takes to do well in the classroom, we have to teach them to be resilient and to have grit, like with the work with Carol Dweck and Amy Duckworth. now that we've had more and more research, like from the Centers for Disease Control and so forth, we realize that there are systems that are involved. And trauma-informed is more like, if you think about a public health approach, it's kind of like that. We have to look at the whole environment as in terms of what's causing the trauma, in terms of knowing how to mitigate it. It's not just like a singular phenomenon in somebody. So that part is also important. So a lot of people have different definitions of trauma. What I'm using here is the one from the Centers for Disease Control. Just quickly going through it, it's trauma, it's a physical, cognitive, or emotional response caused by a traumatic event, a series of event, or a set of circumstances, and it is experienced or perceived as harmful or life-threatening. And it can have lasting effects if it's not dealt with or treated. There's also many different kinds of trauma. There's not just one. There's acute or more of a one-time event like a natural disaster or a car accident or something like that. There's chronic where it's, over a long period of time, could be from childhood onward. There's also complex, could be different kinds, like different levels of trauma, whether it's developmental as a child, whether it is relational through like, some kinds of abuse, whether it's, historical, intergenerational, all those things. And also, I didn't mention, but vicarious trauma is very important, as I think a lot of us in higher education would be considered to be like first responders to many students who disclose to us their stories of trauma, and that can also have an effect on us as well. So again, trauma affecting everyone. Okay. In terms of the way that trauma can affect learning, again, now this is in neuroscience research. My background is in educational psychology, my doctorate, and I've been really interested in how the brain works and how affective considerations can support or detract from learning. So basically, cognitive delays can result. Also the inability to really form and process relationships, as well as the inability to predict and make inferences, and also wariness, being extremely cautious about things around the self. And that can be explained by trauma affecting the different parts of the brain. And I think if you have a background in this, you know that besides, there are many different parts of the brain that are affected when trauma occurs, but the three main ones that you may already be aware of, it would be the amygdala, or the kind of the fear center that detects fear and can go into overdrive, into hypervigilance, if it is constantly activated, as well as the hippocampus being responsible for learning. If the hippocampus is impaired, it's difficult for individuals to maybe distinguish between present and past events, as well as the ability to retain information. And then you have the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive decision-making and emotional regulation. So functional MRIs in war veterans have shown that these actually, they can see physical effects in how they are, if they are, let's say if they are diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, that can show atrophy in the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus, and enlargement in the amygdala. Okay, now triggers. That's another thing that you often hear about when talking about trauma. people are triggered or activated by something. And basically, according to the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, a trigger is an event or circumstances that can produce uncomfortable emotional or psychiatric symptoms. It can cause individuals to relive past traumatic memories, so that it might act as a cue when you hear, see, or smell, or to even taste something. It can serve as a cue that can prompt an increase in maladaptive behavior. And sensory information can activate triggers. It can cause a misfire in the brain so that the brain can misfire, and then the event is in memory storage as it's labeled as a still present threat. So there are many different triggers that can happen in the classroom. And so I think you probably, through your own experience, you probably know some of those triggers. I want to ask you, what do you think are some triggers that kind of crop up in learning or in the classroom, whether it's in person, online, hybrid? What are some things that you think could be triggering? And then smell. Okay.
So I teach creative writing sometimes, and in creative writing, a lot of times if we read particularly poetry or nonfiction memoirs that can be especially descriptive or intense, a lot of times the narration or the narrative experience of the characters can be particularly triggering for students.
Thank you. My husband teaches a course every so often on veterans in transition, and like they're transitioning out of the military, and where the students, if they're veterans, sit in the room matters to them. So if they're sitting with their back to the door, that's a trigger. So they have to be sitting in a certain location.
If a student doesn't understand what, excuse me, what is required of them, if they're feeling confused, then simply having that experience of like, what's the message that comes up that says, I'm stupid, I don't know how to do this, somebody's expecting something of me and I haven't been given the resources. And so all of those messages that can come up that then impedes the learning. So.
One is content, like family of origin that I teach. That comes up a lot. And the other, I had a student tell me that I can't remember exactly how she described it, with processing delays. And so forced participation in the moment, she said was not helpful to her.
So I've heard a lot of your, possible triggers that you've mentioned, and I just kind of put together a list of things that are based on things that I've read about in my own experience. And some of these can be, for example, some common sources can be like if students had past negative experiences with instructors and courses. This is when the brain forms what they call a trauma schemas. So it's kind of like a way of kind of like a worldview of saying, well, I can't trust instructors. They're kind of, they don't care about me. The world is really scary out there. So I have to really I have to have my guard up really high. So also prior preparation, if students they feel like they don't have the right preparation. I deal with this a lot with students who are using LMSs for the first time, and they're really panicking because they don't know how to use. We use D2L Brightspace, and so I do a lot of fielding questions, and there's a lot of panic and students not knowing how to use it. So fear of failing, or maybe students really feel like I have to be perfect. And then also the feeling of being marginalized in a class. And I say like, it's kind of both ways, either feeling like they're being singled out or feeling like they're being ignored, like one side of the spectrum or the other. Things like having their names mispronounced, using wrong pronouns, and also like stereotype threats like, women in math or something like that. Let's go on. There's also interpersonal anxiety that can result when students will be, like you said, forced participation, things like when they have to do class discussions, presentations, or group work, when you like putting them, I'm going to put you into a breakout room with people you have no idea who they are, and you're going to do this exercise with them. And then, have some students kind of like quit the meeting for a few minutes and come back later. That can happen. So these are all different kinds of sources of triggers. So I'm going to keep going here because I want to make sure we're on time. So some common trauma responses that happen. You've probably heard of fight and flight, right? So people who they fight. Some examples could be students who they keep arguing about the points with their instructor or the policies, or why is it like this? And also could be just flight, like just not showing up, just being absent, or not participating in a discussion, or sometimes I call phubbing, like just being on their cell phone while everything else is going on. And then freezing is the other one, with disassociation, just kind of like losing track of things, and or daydreaming. And then fawning is the people pleasing one, which a lot of times people think, well, what's bad about that? What's bad about, I mean, they're doing everything I asked them to do. This is great, but that kind of sets them up for, personally, I think that sets them up for exploitation in the future in the workplace. So I really, I feel strongly about that one. Flop, meaning like, just kind of giving up at the outset, just saying, this is just not going to work. I can't do this. Flock is another one. I wouldn't say it's, necessarily bad, but just a flocking, meaning, I'm going to try to find somebody who's in the same boat and try to figure out, what's going on here. So in terms of the 4 R's of trauma-informed practice, the first one is realization, knowing trauma is ubiquitous and it affects everyone, and it affects individuals as well as groups. Recognition of what the signs are. So when somebody responds a certain way that you might think of as quote unquote out of pocket, you might think, well, could it be as a result of somebody's past experience as a trauma? And then having a response. Knowing what we do know, how can we respond in our policies, practices, and procedures? And then finally, how do we resist re-traumatization? That's not always possible. We try our best, but we can't always be 100%, being able to protect that from happening, because trauma comes from all different sources. And sometimes when students come into the class, you can do the most that you can to really design a very trauma-informed classroom, but sometimes just things outside of the classroom you're not in control of. So, okay. So I want to talk about the principles of trauma-informed educational practice. And what I've done here is I noticed that, there's other kinds of movements or paradigms that we've done in education before that kind of align with these principles. And this is through the CDC again. So the first one has to do with physical, emotional, social, and academic safety, which aligns well with the idea of psychological safety and the 4 levels of psychological safety. You know, the psychological safety to be included, to learn, to contribute, and finally to challenge. So that's the first one. And then the second principle has to do with trustworthiness and transparency, which I think has a lot in common with the tilt paradigm of transparency in learning and teaching. And then if we have support and conclusion, if you think about inclusive pedagogy, that also has many parallels. And then collaboration and mutuality has that sort of we sink or swim together. And cooperative learning back in the day, my doctoral advisor was a big guru of cooperative learning, David Johnson, the Johnson brothers, David and his brother, I can't remember his name right now, but the Johnson brothers. And so that was a very important one. Empowerment, voice, and choice, I think, has a lot of parallels with universal design for learning, which is, I think, if you're an instructional designer, you know all about that. And so the multiple methods of representation, expression, action. So that has similarities. And then you have the piece of social justice, which is, you know, I think it's in line with culturally responsive pedagogy. So I think, you know, you see here, there's a lot of you know, there's a lot of intertwining. And finally, we have resilience, growth, and change, which in the past was something that was really promoted. It still plays a part, but knowing that the resilience is not just always, can't always be just within the individual. There has to be support systems around that person in order to be resilient and to have and to be able to grow.
All right, so we gave you a lot of information about what trauma is, what is trauma informed, and what are some of the principles. Now, we would love to hear your reflection on what are some barriers or misconceptions about trauma informed. And I'm going to share one. This is something that I've misunderstood, and now I don't anymore, which is really good. So I'm learning. So the responses, you know, the fight, flight, flock, I thought it was quick. Right? When people encounter trauma, they do it and then it's over, right? It's not, right? It shows up on how people interact with each other, how our learners interact with you. And it's not something quick, and it doesn't go over immediately. So that's something that I train myself to recognize, right? That's my misconception.
I think that a common misconception, and one that I know that I've wrestled with in the past, is that people are always aware of their trauma. I think that as conversations about trauma and trauma-informed pedagogy, as those conversations have evolved, I think that one of the things that's become more commonplace in like popular conversations about these sorts of things is that we're not always aware of our trauma. And so I think that that is a tricky thing when you're thinking about how do I prepare a class for students when they may have barriers or challenges that they're dealing with that they don't even know about necessarily. For them, it's just a Tuesday. But how do we design for that, I think is a challenge.
Great challenge. Any other thoughts? Oh, there you are.
So one of the things that came to my mind throughout all of this is that, yes, I know we really do focus on the students and how, at least at the institutions I'm involved in, we have what we call the culture of care. And we really want to do that empathy with the students and all of that, where, you know, it's just a good best practice. But I also look at it too, that we also need to think about the faculty member, because we talk about the students having these traumatic events, Well, us as the faculty member, we also have those traumatic events. And I think that's hard for us as faculty to convey our personal experience, especially because we don't want to get that personal with our students. But how do we best convey, like, my husband just died, my husband just got diagnosed with cancer, my mom just died, now I have to care for my father, and there's lots of stuff that happens to us too. So I think it extends the conversation of, yes, we need to do better in our design to talk about trauma infused pedagogy, but also how do we do it with delivery?
Okay, thank you very much for your responses. Some of the barriers that we've also seen in the literature include, as you say, a lack of understanding or awareness of trauma, being aware of trauma in students, but maybe not being aware of our own trauma. There may be limited resources. I'll tell you that the literature on higher education, trauma-informed practice is much more limited than K through 12. So that is something that is also, that's a big limitation. There's also resistance to change. People might say, I don't want to become a psychologist in the classroom. I'm not a therapist. I don't want things to get out of hand. I'm here to teach my subject. And there's the trauma and the burnout of staff and faculty here, as well as if something is going to be successful, it has to have administrative support. I mean, that just goes without saying. And then, of course, there's systemic issues outside of the classroom, that is going to be brought inside of the classroom. Now I'm going to turn this over to Young to talk about our article.
And with all that, that's the reason why one of our motivation to write an article around trauma-informed pedagogy, right? So I love that you mentioned that faculty, we are people too. We have lives, we have families, we experience trauma. In addition to all that, we have things that we have no time sometimes to put all this stuff together, right? Because there's a lot of talk, but there's not very much things that we can do, like concrete things that we can do. And that's what this article is, right? This article is talk about trauma and talk about what we can do about it. To even just start at the very minimal, like the low-hanging fruit, right? So that's one of the reasons why we create this little checklist that we have. And it's a checklist, right? It's not, it's meant to guide you and to give you ideas on what you can do right away, on small things that we can do to build up, right? So it addresses stuff like safety and transparency and trustworthiness and peer support and collaboration and empowerment. And then what we can do with our course design and materials and policies, right? For example, one of the simplest things we can do is add a trauma statement to your syllabus. Just saying that, look, we recognize that you are human, you experience the world, you have trauma, and what you go through the class that might come up, right? And I'm here for you when it do come up, and I'm going to do my best to support you. So that the statement is there. And as you go down some of this list, some of the things is easier to implement right away. Some of it takes a little bit more time to implement, but hopefully you move from the physical environment we can do to sort of changing mindset, right? To stuff like reinforce that their opinion matters, create opportunities for underrepresented students to share their experiences, right? But let's start by setting the foundation. Yes, you got 5 minutes. Thank you.
So with that, I want to kind of talk a little bit quicker. So some specific trauma-informed practices, as Jung also mentioned, was the trauma-informed statement. All of these examples are in a handout that's on the platform that we uploaded. So you can see examples of each and every one of these. So content warnings, we think of trigger warnings, choice boards, meaning giving students choice about how they're going to do an assignment, letting students pitch their own ideas, giving extensions sometimes to students for homework, allowing anonymous feedback, if you have the technology offering high flex format, and so forth. I just want to keep going here. So the general principles have to do with, of course, you want to design the content ahead of time. You want to offer student support, but then thinking about how am I going to deliver this course in a trauma-informed way, and how am I going to reflect on my own experience and my own trauma. We just have a few more minutes, but I do want to talk about trauma-informed strategies for different disciplines. As you see, there's plenty of different disciplines. Not every discipline has the same kinds of activities or content. So things to consider would be things like what is the student's prior experience with the course? And also, are they getting a lot of pressure to succeed from their family? Do they have to balance many different roles? Demands of various disciplines. Some are very cutthroat and competitive. So how are you going to deal with that? And then also you think about the course concept, class and historical, racial representation, and also students' prior activities with things like giving feedback and giving presentations and working in groups that can all add to it. So we don't have time for this, but I want you to take a look at the checklist that we have there. There's many, many different specific tangible strategies that can be used in designing a trauma-informed classroom. Think about what you would like to implement in your course or at your institution. And also think about some of the challenges you might come across, because not everybody is going to maybe be as receptive. You might have to start small and kind of grow out, but it can be done. Okay, yes, do we have a few questions?
In leadership, and so I've got experience working with younger students on this. And I guess one of the barriers or misconceptions that I wanted to think is that faculty or any one of us in this room think that because someone has experienced trauma, therefore we have to, like, I have to push you towards the counselor. And I actually believe that all of us have it within us, and maybe we need training on this. All of us has within us to be a human with somebody else, right? Every one of us can listen. Every one of us knows what it's like to have fear in our lives and to have worry in our lives and to have regret in our lives, right? And we can sit with somebody in that. And point number two is I found if I just let students talk to me about their trauma all the time, they would stay there and they would be stuck. And the goal is not for students to feel like I can't ever get out of it, right? And the goal is actually to help them, okay, how do you deal with it? And then what's next? What's the next step you need to take in your life, right? And I think we all have that within us to be able to share with others.
Bravo.
All right, one, I want to say thank you for this checklist, because I think as it's very applicable to a guide to help us design our courses. I want to put a plug in for next year that would it be possible to submit a workshop? Because I think with the amount of discussion that we had and the interest in this topic, that I really think doing a discussion on or a workshop on how we can actually integrate all of these and talk about some of those other models like the culturally responsive design and how that can actually fit together to create a really cool course for our students.
Definitely. Thank you for the. Yes, like I said, there's so much to talk about and there's so little time in these things. So I really welcome you to continue our conversation. I have our emails here. One of our authors, Rachel Gunderson from Cornell, could not be here, unfortunately, but the three of us wrote this article, and we really look forward to more collaborations with other interested academics and more kinds of collaborations like this. So thank you, and hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.